far, we have heard no alternative yet for performance appraisals. I think that's noteworthy because if we're going to say that something is not effective for performance management, then we should bring up something that is more effective, right? Otherwise, that by default means that performance appraisals are the most effective. So thus far, we haven't heard, an alternative. So there's no alternative. What we have heard are many good examples of performance appraisals done incorrectly. We haven't heard a study such as the one we quoted where there was a very strong positive correlation coefficient of 0.41 that showed that just the occurrence of a performance appraisal increased performance management in a company. So we've said that here, but over here we have many examples of just poor performance appraisals. However, that does not mean we should throw the baby out with the bathwater and just not do them altogether, right? We should be able to understand this pretty good in this class. We've talked about this on Monday, but we've also talked a lot about selection in this class. And I bring that up because it's related pretty closely. When we were talking about interviews and selection, we talked about how unstructured interviews occur the most, but they're also the least effective. Dr. Wilson didn't say, and because of that, we should throw out interviews, never interview altogether. No, it is the same with feedback, with performance reviews. Even if feedback is not done correctly, that doesn't mean we stop it. That's an indictment against those managers and those HR people who do it incorrectly, but it's not an indictment of performance reviews as a whole. So a lot of what we heard from the con team was simple human error. They brought up some good points about the objectivity bias in performance appraisals. But the primary thing they kept talking about were simple human error. And so if we're just looking at human error performance appraisals, then we should be aware that if we say that we can't judge each other effectively, then we may as well not work together at all, if that's the main point, right? If we can't look at someone and try and give good feedback. They mentioned a poisonous work atmosphere. Well, the opposite is also true. If performance appraisals are done correctly, you can have a very, very positive work environment. Again, it's just about doing them right, not about not doing them at all. They mentioned that they're only done once a year. That's already been disproven by human resource professionals. The Harvard Business Review article Thomas was quoting mentioned you should do them quarterly or on a per project basis. We also mentioned that in class. But I want to come back to the objectivity thing because that's important. It is tough to judge somebody objectively, but it's not impossible. It's not possible to do a decent job of it. And when you mix in positive reinforcement while you're doing this, it can be really effective. We've learned in this class about the BARS ranking scale just on Monday. The BARS ranking scale is exactly that. It's taking subjective rankings and trying to make them more objective, if you remember, right? We looked at, they're basically saying you're ranking on a scale of 1 to 5, but then that 1 to 5 gives you, they have descriptions of what each of those numbers actually mean. So it becomes much more objective. And again, we're all humans. If we're going to say we can't review each other, we may as well say we shouldn't work together at all, because we have to be able to give each other feedback on one level or another. And lastly, I'd like to quote someone here. I'll tell you who it is when I'm done. She says that performance reviews are an effective tool when utilized correctly. But in order for them to be effective, there needs to be support from the leadership team and sufficient training for managers. That was said by Bettina Davis. She's the Vice President of HR at the Society for Human Resources Management. So she's got a pretty unique perspective on this. And that's all. Thanks.
And your 4 minutes for anything else. Ready?
Yeah.
Good, good.
To start, part of the issue with performance evaluations is that they kind of cause a double standard, and it's that employees are kind of subject to what management expects them to do or what they're held accountable to. But the same thing can be said for managers. So you can have managers say, oh, you need to do this objective, you need to fill this objective, but all the while we can do whatever we want. We want to run things. And because of this, there can lead to a disconnect from the employees to the managers. So there can be resentment towards management, there can be friction in just in general harm in production. or productivity of the workforce. It also leads into accuracy issues as another point. Like they said, not everything can be accurate, but they're also saying that everything has to go right for this to be justified. But for the most part, managers are going to want to avoid conflict, and they're going to try to minimize any resistance from the workforce, as mentioned before. So this will lead to either people getting higher ratings than what they're supposed to be getting. Say an average worker is getting really high marks versus someone who's doing under performing below average is getting passing grades just so they don't have to directly address any shortcomings with the employee. Yeah.
So there's two major types of performance appraisers. It's managerial feedback and 360-degree feedback. Large part of the companies, especially unionized companies and companies who looking at the input from the whole collective and the organization, they try to avoid managerial feedback due to the large many issues of biases. And there's dozens types of biases that we can talk about, but we don't have time, so I'll give you a few main ones. One is called horns and halos effect. So if we talk about horn effect, one person can be perfect employee in all aspects, but he can do just one thing bad and it ruins all his feedback. For example, administrative assistants can be a rock star in all aspects, but he forgot filing files. So company have to hire a temp to do that job, so that assistant getting bad feedback overall. And always also the halo feedback, which judge only by one positive aspect of the person performance. But so, for example, as a sales manager or sales representative can hit top numbers, so the seniors of the company, they love him for his performance, but in the back he can be totally rude to his employees and cause a havoc in department. But since the senior management like him, he gets that positive feedback. Another bias is a purposeful bias, which is one of the, I think, worst one.
If you just want to finish your thought really quickly, you can do that.
Okay. As a purposeful bias is I think is one of the worst. For example, you have a excellent employee that he shows talent, defiance of business orders and ambitions to reach a higher level in business, but his manager kind of feels threatened by it, so he sabotages his feedback purposely.
And 3 minutes, you guys ready?
In conclusion, performance appraisal is an effective tool to performance management. The system of appraisal should be properly planned, well organized, and implemented in order for it to be reliable and for employees to trust it. Like a study was done by the Society of Human Resource Management, where they had professionals HR from various companies, and they came over. They believe in performance management. So we're trying to see how they will react to performance appraisal. So after this practice was carried on, the professional HR rated the performance appraisal with a high score of 8. So this is an example to prove that performance appraisal is an effective tools to performance management. And as we learned in class on Monday, that for performance appraisals to be effective, it needs to be designed by professional HR. Once they are designed by professional HR, they will have to be effective and be done correctly. Like another study was done by the Society of Human Resource Management. It said that 97% of companies within the United States do performance appraisals, and we just have like 3% that don't do no form of performance appraisal at all. And if you have 97 to 3, this is a common example that this is important for performance management. This will help our organization. And if you have people doing performance appraisal, you have like the developmental part of the organization will improve, their strategies to accomplish their goal, everything's going to improve. And we have like the administrative part. We have people within the administrative department will help improve their skills. And it is also impossible for any organization to survive without performance appraisal. We always need performance appraisal because it's help to identify our strengths and our weaknesses, and within our range, we can build up our skill and know where we can develop a training that will help improve our productivities within the organization.
Who's going?
So there are two kind of issues with the use of, well, in conclusion, there are two issues in particular with the performance evaluations. One is that they're kind of situational, not all organizations are able to use them. Say if a company is more structured or heavily guidelined, then sure, there are procedures and expectations associated with the job and things like that, that would benefit having performance evaluations. However, not all organizations are like this. There are organizations that are decentralized or basically let the employees figure out how to solve problems of their own or find out what works best to solve particular problems. So for situations such as this, you can't really use a performance evaluation because you can't hold how someone's solved one problem to another if they use different methods. Another issue is that not all employees will necessarily benefit from feedback. Some employees, whether it's good feedback or others, are going to be resistant. They will basically not appreciate the feedback. They don't like being told, yes, you're doing a good job, no, you're doing a bad job. And so it would possibly affect morale or productivity among individuals. And some people just don't like being evaluated. It's similar to testing anxiety. You may do well trying to study for class, go through homework, things like that, but when the test comes, or in this case, performance evaluations, you may start to feel stressed out, you might start to feel the pressure and your performance will start to suffer. And since it's a performance evaluation, that'll be reflected and your harm to performance will ultimately have to go count against you.
Questions from the class?
So this is for the pro side. You guys were talking about training managers to conduct effective reviews. How do you propose, like what standard do you propose to do that?
Well, that depends on the company and what kind of job you do. So in those Harvard Business Review articles, I can send you, there's two of them, I can send you those afterwards if you're interested. But some jobs really lend themselves to basic numeric rankings, and some lend themselves more to ranking like the bar system. So that's primarily, you have to train them on whichever one fits their organization. And so that would come in from hopefully having somebody who's at least a master's level HR thinker in your organization, or bring in like a PhD consultant, but that's a pretty standard procedure.
You guys said there was a positive correlation of 0.41, and what was that of? I didn't catch it.
It was between just having a performance appraisal system in place and job improvement.
And that was from the American Psychological Association.
I had a question for the pro side too. So you guys have a statistic that 97% of companies do performance appraisals. Is there any specific industry like that is that 3% or anything, or is it kind of just mixed
I
up?
think it's just mixed.
Okay.
Yeah. It's usually the smaller you are, the less likely you are to do it.